Welcome back to another episode of MProper Mimi, where we talk about things that empower women at home, work, and play. I am your host, Mimi Jax, and let me tell you what we are talking about today. Usually on Improper Mimi, when we talk about knowing your triggers, it has to do with dealing with trauma. Not this time. For this episode, Knowing Your Triggers, we are referring to those things that make our allergies and asthma flare up. I was able to speak with an allergy specialist, Dr. Lakiea Wright, to have an important conversation about her journey to becoming a specialist in the field of allergies, as well as the importance of knowing our triggers, racial disparities when it comes to allergies and asthma diagnosis, and what our families and caregivers can do to help ensure children are safe when it comes to these subjects. So, Lakiea, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. I'd love if you can maybe even introduce yourself a little further and let the listeners know a little more about yourself.
My name is Dr. Lakiea Wright, and I am actually an internist and uh, both a board certified internist and allergist immunologist. I have experience seeing both children and adults for asthma and allergic disease. And I did my training in the Boston area and then continued working in the Boston area as well.
Cool. And how did you kind of stumble into this specialty? I know you're a doctor and you went through all your education, and then what was it about, allergies that kind of drew you to that?
Yeah, so it's that is a very good question. I grew up with asthma and environmental allergies, eczema, and
Hmm.
so I was one of those kids that was constantly going to the doctor and going to the ER for asthma attacks.
Okay,
And
yeah.
so I really began to, think to myself, oh, well, my doctors are helping me. This is something I could do when I grow up. And so that sort of stuck with me. And I had a passion and drive to become a doctor from a young age. But I
Hmm.
actually didn't know about allergy and immunology as a field until I actually got into medical school. And I thought, well, this is amazing because allergists and immunologists treat both asthma and different types of allergic diseases. And so from medical school, once I found out about it, I began to rotate through the clinics and work with allergists and immunologists. And then from there, I was convinced that that's the path I should take. So
Yeah.
after medical school, I specialized in internal medicine, so seeing adults. But then after internal medicine residency, I did allergy fellowship training. So 4 years after medical school for internal medicine, 3 years for allergy.
Hmm.
Once you're in allergy immunology training, you can actually see both children and adults, and that's what I did. And then ultimately, I practiced seeing both children and adults.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So definitely I'd say have to be a passion to follow through, because it seems like it took so many years to go through different routes and to even end up where you are now.
Yes, that is very true. It took a long time,
Hmm.
many hours in the hospital and clinics, but really helping patients. And so I really felt, passionate about it, committed to it. And although it was a long time, in many ways, it sort of flew by. So I'm very happy that I chose that career path.
Yeah, yeah. When we enjoy what we do, time just seems to fly. um,
Yes.
I know that for myself personally, like I didn't really start having allergies or until my 30s, and then when I started entering my 40s, there were even more, new allergies that began to pop up into my life, and so that was different and a new experience for me, because I know like my brother and my mom, like they've had it all their lives. And then even my daughter, she's also developed, certain allergies to like the cold, and she has asthma also. And I could just remember thinking when she was little that, like because we were in the city, because we lived in Boston at the time, I'm like, okay, well, maybe just they're just saying that all kids have, asthma. But because my mom had it, I kind of figured, I'm like, okay, it could be, something that is, also passed down through our family or whatnot. Um, do you find that people develop, certain allergies or even asthma, perhaps more as children or more as adults as they mature?
Yes, so that's a very good question, and there's a little bit of nuance there. So we see, for example, with food allergies, we do see a higher prevalence in children, and particularly when we look at foods like milk and eggs. But then we
Mm,
also see now more or higher prevalence of allergies in general, but including adult onset allergies, including food allergy. Particularly, you see with adults, you see adult onset shellfish allergy.
hmm.
And just to talk about environmental allergies, like the runny nose, the stuffy nose, the dust mites, the pollens, things like that. We
Yeah.
see with climate change, we think that climate change is influencing this, that we see more adults saying, well, I didn't have these environmental allergies as a child or in childhood, but now I'm in my 30s, my 40s, even
Hmm.
50s, and now I have, the classic sort of hay fever environment to allergies. So I would say in general, we do see um, uh, a higher prevalence
Hmm.
of allergies now, and we do see adult onset allergies as well.
Oh wow. Okay, good. So it's comforting to know that I'm not the only one.
No, you are part of that group that, patients are saying, hey, I never had this in childhood, but I'm
Exactly.
having it now. And yes, we do say that. So we still see, children developing allergies. And then to talk about asthma, we see a
Hmm.
lot of allergic asthma in children. So their asthma is being triggered by the pollens, the dust, cockroach,
Oh.
mouse, common environmental
Hmm.
allergens. But then we also see that, adults can even develop asthma, even if they didn't have it in childhood. And that may have an allergic skewing as well, or there may be
Yeah.
some, with the immune system may be going haywire in some way. So yes, so we see it in both areas, asthma and allergies.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, interesting that they're so closely connected or that they could be triggers for each other. um,
Yes.
that people really need to kind of understand their bodies and know when things are when they're having a reaction or when something different is happening and most people can generally tell or know their body enough to know that this isn't normal, this is how I used to react to things like this, maybe we should go get it checked out.
Yes, I think that is key. And I always try to participate in programs to raise awareness about allergies. And, I really think it's important that patients are aware that, the common signs and symptoms, asthma,
Hmm.
shortness of breath, chest tightness, wheezing, those are some of the common symptoms. But then also, well, what are your triggers? Is it happening in the fall, in the spring, or
Hmm.
winter time when the air is really cold? And then, actually following up and talking to your doctor about, what your symptoms are, what your triggers may be, because I think that uh, some patients think,
Hmm.
well, this might be normal or it's not that bad. And really, we want to make sure that, that you're plugged in with your doctor to have that official evaluation, because we don't want to wait till things are bad.
Right. Yeah. Thank goodness, like my daughter growing up with asthma never really had a major asthma attack where we had to go to the hospital. She had her regiment, so we, kept a close eye on that.
Yes.
I even sent her to asthma camp one summer, where, the kids were able to run around and they were able to learn, their bodies, learn about triggers, learn how to breathe, learn how to use their inhalers. So, just kind of reinforcing that just because you have, asthma, you still can have fun, you just have to know your
Yes.
limits, and be aware of them.
Yes, that is so important. Being plugged into a doctor, seeing them regularly, and having a medication, regimen. And then some
Hmm.
people who have environmental allergies, the runny nose and stuffy nose, the hay fever symptoms, they can, you know, take over the counter medications. But if those aren't helping, then it would
Right.
really be appropriate to see the doctor because there are other treatment regimens, like, for example, allergy shots where you actually
Mm.
get what you're allergic to under the supervision of an allergist and escalating doses to retrain your immune system. Because what an
Mm.
allergy, for example, environmental allergy is you're inhaling the dust or the pollen and your system is overreacting, and that's how you get the symptoms. The runny nose, the stuffy nose, the watery, itchy eyes. But then
Wow.
you can retrain that immune system to not overreact.
Hmm.
And that can really improve your quality of life. And as I mentioned, some people who have environmental allergies also, those environmental allergies serve as triggers for their asthma. So they have like
Hmm.
allergic asthma. And then, we really want to make sure that we assess our patients and try to prevent them from having symptoms or having any sort of major attack. And I think that's why it's really important to be sort of plugged in to your primary care provider about your symptoms, your triggers. And then some patients tell me, well, I don't want to take medications. And I think, some patients who have mild symptoms, perhaps they don't need to take the over the counter medications, but you would at
Hmm.
least want to know what your triggers are and have a
Right.
conversation with your doctor about the different options.
Oh yes, yeah. I know some people who they will suffer through with their like environmental allergies, and they'll be down and out for a few days, and then
Yes.
once it passes they'll come back, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, but why?"
You don't have to suffer.
Right, you don't have to suffer, like, or even if you want to look at some natural remedies, and
Yes.
they'll just tough it out instead, and I'm like, well, God bless you, because pass me my over the counter medications, because I want to get this symptoms under control as soon as possible. um and that even makes me think also, like, yes, we definitely want to encourage people to seek out professional medical advice. Like, I remember a conversation I was having even about like alopecia with another doctor that we were talking with on the podcast, and she was mentioning how sometimes some of her patients, she could see a difference occasionally between the people of color and maybe even some of her white patients, that you know the timing that they come in to see her. Some of the black patients will be like, oh, they'll just wait, see how things go, see how things change, and it might be months or years before they go in to get seen. And whereas others might go in right away to address the issue. And so that's just something I just throw out there to people to actually go, and if you notice something that's different, definitely get it checked out by a professional so that they can help you make you know informed decisions about whatever it is that you may be going through.
Yes, and
um,
we do see racial ethnic disparities within communities of color with
mhm,
access to specialists and perhaps even referrals, to specialists. So I
mm.
always, tell my patients that, they should feel empowered to ask questions, empowered to, ask, should I be seeing an additional specialist?
Mhm.
And I think that's all part of comprehensive care. It's a discussion.
Right. Yeah. That's one thing, like, over the almost practically 2 years with COVID and the pandemic, of different disparities, popping up amongst in our communities, and, just being more informed about them. I think even myself personally, um, helps me to ask more questions. whether
Yes.
it's my own health or my own neighborhood or transportation, just to, feel free to ask more questions and press the issue. Um, I know one of my younger cousins, she also has a lot of food allergies. And so that just also opens my eyes that, okay, just to be aware of um, those around you and remembering and trying to provide alternative, solutions for them for like these large family gatherings or even small ones where you just get together and you're trying to have snacks for people. So trying to remember and accommodate for others as well.
Yes, and that's so important that you bring up, food allergies because we have a lot of data in the medical community about asthma health disparities,
Hmm.
particularly Blacks and Puerto Ricans having higher prevalence rates of asthma, as well as higher asthma morbidity and mortality. So, for example, when you
Wow.
talk about asthma, African Americans or patients who self identify as Black have 2 to 3 times the death rates compared to whites. And we have a
Mm,
lot of data about that. And now we're seeing more data coming up about food allergies, how in communities of color, particularly among Blacks and Hispanics or Latinos, that there may be a delay in diagnosis. The
hmm.
diagnosis of food allergy may take longer to confirm just because of perhaps access to care, access to testing. We need
Hmm.
more, data to sort of dive a little deeper into why that's happening. And then, um, we're seeing the data in the data that there are more ER visits and more severe reactions. And so that may be related to the education being, received around food allergies, educating people
Mm,
about food allergies, the signs and symptoms, having access to epinephrine auto injector and knowing when to take it. And then also dietary education. If you have a milk allergy, of course, you can't have cheese, but just knowing that milk is a major component of many cheeses.
right.
And
Hmm.
so I think there's a lot of uh, more information that we need around food allergy disparities when it comes to communities of color. And, some of it may perhaps involve, educating about the disease itself, but then also in a culturally competent way, like understanding the culture and when foods are introduced and perceptions of food allergies is really
Yeah.
important as well.
Yes, yeah, and I can see where the perception and the education of food allergies could really come into play in, some of the African American, communities where a lot of times I've, heard parents or, families where they'll say, you're going to eat everything that's on your plate, and, or, you may be visiting with someone else and, you don't really have options or, you have to be sure that if children have allergies, either you tell the person they're with or that the child is able to speak up for themselves because, sometimes they aren't giving choices. And then if people aren't aware, then they'll just automatically make assumptions that, oh, you just don't want to eat this? No, you need to eat this. And it's
Yes.
not just that easy for some people.
Yes, and I think that is so true that we really have to do a lot of education around food allergy because we've seen since uh, 2010, we've seen a rise in food allergies, with some of the common food allergies even doubling in
Wow.
prevalence. So,
Hmm.
some people may not be aware or fully aware that food allergies are highly, prevalent, especially among children compared to, let's say, the 80s.
Hmm.
And we really need to educate caregivers, family members as to what a safe food is and what a safe food isn't. And that this is not a preference, this is a major um, condition, a disease. in which, we have to take it seriously, and we have to take precautions. And it's not a preference. It's, you can think of food as medicine, and this would be one of
Mm-hmm.
the that you cannot eat list, because I have to often explain, and when I get some resistance from, family members, or the care provider will tell me, the caregiver will tell me, "Oh, well, my family doesn't get it." I say, "Bring them in," because we really have to counsel them about,
Mm-hmm.
the risk of anaphylaxis, the risk of a severe allergic reaction is there, including death, and that's
Right.
that's why we want to educate, and we want to keep, in many cases I see children with food allergies, but
Mm-hmm.
it can be applicable to adults as well. But we want to keep patients safe. And the reason I mention children is because some cannot speak for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
depending on what age, or perhaps the dynamics, a child versus an adult. And it can be a lot of pressure, but we have to get that message across that allergies, food allergies specifically, when you've been,
Right.
diagnosed with a food allergy, you are at risk of having anaphylaxis, a severe allergic reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And, that can result in death. And so we really have to emphasize, how to keep patients safe, including children.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't want to wait until there's a situation that's very serious before, people take notice. We want them to be aware of it up front, Um, I know that even for myself, when I go back and look at some of the items that I've, been allergic to, you're right. Like when you mention milk, or, for myself, like citrus, it's in a lot of things. You really have to take a look at your ingredients. And for me, because it was onset as an adult, I really had to remember to tell, staff when I go out to eat, because half the time, I could be in the middle of dinner. I'm like, wait a minute, something doesn't feel right. I'm like, oh, I forgot to ask, or I forgot to tell them,
Yes.
about an allergy. And sometimes when you're looking at a menu, you just don't think about every single ingredient that they might have used to prepare that dish. Um, so
Yes,
that's
I totally agree. And that's why it's so important to, especially as physicians or as an allergist, we
hmm
make the diagnosis, and we come up with a treatment plan. For example, avoid that food, but there's a lot of counseling that goes into that, how to read an ingredient list, and really counseling the patient, the caregiver or parent, to really understand how, when we're talking about food allergy, particularly we're talking about IgE mediated allergy, for which you
hmm
can have a severe allergic reaction. You can be at risk of death because because that severe reaction can occur. And so we like to explain that this may be life threatening, and so we want to make sure that that messaging is in there.
Definitely, yes. Um, and I know you even mentioned, with caregivers or family members coming to ask questions or ask for advice. What are some things, maybe some other things that mothers and caregivers can do to help protect their loved ones? When it comes to caring for
Yes.
them.
And so that's a very important question. And I want to just take a minute to talk about food allergies in children, and why they may develop. So, I mean, the short answer is we're not exactly sure why we see a rise in the allergy, and why certain children may get food allergies or not get food allergies. I just
hmm
want to focus on the kids for 1 minute. And we think that a large part of it may be the delayed introduction of allergenic foods. So, for example, the
hmm
common 8 allergens, just to name a few: milk, egg, fish, peanut, tree nuts, shellfish, soy, wheat, and even the ninth most common food allergen is sesame. And so when we look at the data in the scientific community, we see that, particularly for peanut, we have the most data that delaying introduction, especially in children who are high risk. For example, if you have eczema, which can be allergic, that may put you, it depending on if it's moderate to severe, it may put you at higher risk for developing. It is considered a risk factor for developing food
Mm.
allergy. Not every child that has eczema will go on to develop a food allergy, but they're higher risk. And so, as pediatricians, as allergist immunologists, we have to talk to the patients about the introduction of food and introducing it early. And we see that in clinical studies. For example, there was a study called the LEAP study. Uh, in children who are high risk, introducing peanut between 4 to 6 months is recommended. And a
Mm-hmm.
lower risk patients, definitely you want to introduce before 11 months, that 4 to 11 month range. And I think that is newer information, like over the past a little over 5 years or so.
Oh, wow.
Because in the past, we would say wait until the child is older to introduce foods. But we
Yeah.
actually see now that introduction of food, particularly with peanut, is
Mm-hmm.
good because your body sees the food and then it's less likely to mount an allergic reaction if it sees the food early. If it sees
Yeah.
the food later in life, meaning 1 year or older, that immune system may be more prone to reacting and the child developing a food allergy. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important, because again, this is sort of a change in the school of thought around introduction of foods.
Right.
And we see that in the community, this messaging is not getting out as much as we would like. Like if you look at studies, did your pediatrician tell you about the early introduction of food, and did you go on to introduce those food in your children,
Mm-hmm.
in your infants? And so that is one thing that we definitely need to talk about. We talk about breastfeeding, and the child should be exclusively breastfed for 6 months. But then we also have to talk about the risk of food allergies and withholding food, and the risk of that child potentially developing a life threatening allergy. So it's
Oh,
really important to have that conversation with the pediatrician. Um, which foods should I introduce and at what time? Because we
right.
do have a school of thought that says the earlier the better. But of course, the child has to be ready for foods, which is
Mm-hmm.
usually around 4 months. So you want to talk to your pediatrician about that plan, and that's really important.
Oh, good. Yeah, definitely. As with most things, that communication is key. Just to ensure that, like you say, like if you're going to switch up on a school of thought and to try to introduce items earlier, you want to be sure it's that's what your doctor or pediatrician are recommending as well. Oh, cool. Yeah, that's interesting. So, even as we're talking and speaking, and so glad that you're here so we could share information with people. What are, how do, parents, and I'm sure, learn about different allergies and precautions that they should take. And I'm even guessing and imagining, from the pediatrician, but also from caregivers. So caregivers being kept aware would probably be another really important program as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Making sure that they're up to date with the latest information, which I know that they go through so many different, trainings and learning themselves. So, not an easy task for our teachers and caregivers out there
Yes.
to help keep everyone safe. Okay, cool. And then I'd like to just also maybe even ask about, I know we talked about some of the disparities amongst allergy cases amongst those in the Black community as well. Have you noticed? I think we've mentioned maybe even an uptick in environmental allergies, but have you noticed maybe even over the last year or two, just even with the pandemic and COVID? If I don't know if that's had any impact as well, or maybe people were seeking out more inquiries about, their health or their children's health during that time.
Yes, I think that with the onset of the pandemic, I think that people may have realized this before, but there was more weight given to the sort of symptoms that you
Mm,
were having. So um, we've been in this pandemic for almost 2 years now, right?
yeah.
And so those common symptoms of COVID with the cough, potentially some sort of nasal symptoms, the nasal congestion, the runny nose. Um, People started to think, well, do I have COVID or is it, my allergies? Could it be a combination of both? And it's actually really hard to tease those apart. But if you have other symptoms like fever,
Mm-hmm.
stomach upset, things like that, are not classic allergy symptoms, and allergies alone would not cause those symptoms. So I
Right.
think in part it made people more conscious of their symptoms and then to seek out help and advice from their physicians to try to tease that apart. And sometimes you just need to get tested
Mm-hmm.
for COVID to figure that out, whether you have an active infection. And then when it comes to your allergies, knowing that there are I would say maybe there was even more of an incentive to control those allergy,
Mm-hmm.
symptoms, because you didn't want to have this confusing, sort of situation. And acknowledging that, well, okay, what are my triggers? Helping to identify those triggers, avoiding those triggers, wearing masks, because even masks would help to reduce your exposure to viruses. It
Mm-hmm.
also actually, when you're outdoors and there are things like pollens and mold, it also helps to reduce your exposure to allergens, or at least
Yeah.
those, sort of surgical masks that are really have the tight knitting on them,
Mm-hmm.
and a really good filter. And so I think that people became more aware of their symptoms and sought out more information about how they could potentially avoid it, what their triggers are. And so I think that that was good to have that more disease state awareness around allergies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was really triggered by this sort of overlap, which can be hard to tell between viruses and some allergy symptoms.
Right. Yeah. Because I definitely sometimes even forget about, some of my allergy symptoms, and I'm like, oh no, I'm sick. And then I'm like, oh no, wait a minute. Yeah. Okay. This is my allergies.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Like, okay, relax, remember, your regiment. So like, okay, we can help to control this.
Yes, yes.
Oh my goodness. Oh, well, thank you. I definitely agree like that over the past, couple years, even, throughout the pandemic, that people have become a little more, aware of their surroundings, aware of their body and how their body reacts, and when they're, maybe coughing, or maybe when they have a trigger and, have like hay fever symptoms. And so that they are trying to take care of their health a little more and the health of those around them. Um,
Yes, and I think that's so important to have that awareness and then to have it sort of permeate different aspects of your health, because we
mhm,
did see with the pandemic, that healthcare screenings went down, vaccinations went down, but I think that
mm,
more people are, so we're sort of living in the pandemic, like developing a new sense of normalcy, and
mm.
then trying to get back those health screenings, trying to get back those regular visits with the doctor, and get those vaccination schedule back on track.
Right. Yes, exactly. With more knowledge of even, where we are currently, but then knowing, okay, what's safe and, what's okay to go out and do, and keep up
Yes,
with your regular appointments, just with those same precautions that they've taught us so well over the last, several months. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Well, Lakia, I appreciate, again, so much you spending some time with me and talking to our listeners and sharing your experience, to your journey to where you are currently in your career, as well as some of those programs that you've seen and information that we have that we could share with our caregivers, and even that parents and aunts as well can take note of when they're dealing with their children, or dealing even with their own onset of adult, allergies and or asthma symptoms and reactions. And just, are there any other last minute items you want to mention before we get ready to close out?
I just want to say, as we mentioned before, it's really important to talk to your doctor about allergies, symptoms,
Hmm.
whether it's environmental allergies, or even if it's asthma that may or may not be triggered by allergies, but the majority
Hmm.
of asthma can have allergic triggers, whether it's food allergies. And we didn't go into this, but even like a bee sting allergy, any sort of,
Yes.
allergic reaction or adverse reaction, it's really important to go to your doctor, have all the information ready. What are your symptoms? When did they happen in relationship to the exposure? And have you taken any medications, even if it's over the counter medications, and did you feel better? And then in
Hmm.
some cases where and we have environmental allergies and you don't get better with over the counter medications, it may be appropriate. We can't exactly identify the trigger to have, allergy testing, whether it's blood testing or skin prick testing. And
Hmm.
I think it's really important to talk to your primary care provider, or maybe important to go see a specialist, whether it's an allergist, immunologist, or, it could even be a lung doctor, if there's asthma or concern for other lung disease there. And we also talked about the food allergy prevention in children with early introduction. I think that is some messaging that we really have to get out, and really something important to talk to your child's pediatrician about.
Yes, definitely. And, I love even learning and spreading the word that there is a specialty, for allergy and
Yes.
immunology. Because, even that, a lot of people may not even know specifically. They may just think, oh, let me just, take over the counter or just go see my, regular physician. But with more knowledge is more power. So if you need to ask more
Yes.
questions and get a referral, then at least you know that there's others who deal specifically, with allergies and immunologies.
Yes, I couldn't agree more.
Excellent. Well, good. Well, thank you once again, Dr. Lakiea, for joining us.
Thank you, Mimi.
I just want to be sure to thank all of those who are listening to Improper Mimi, where we talk about those things that empower women at home, work, and play. I just want to remind everyone to stay as fabulous as you are, continue to look out for each other and protect yourself. And as always, keep telling Black stories. So, ciao.
Thank you. Bye bye.